Our group did our presentation on the historical evolution of the steel mill industry. We take you through the time period from 1850 to 1970 and show you how much steel has evolved through time. In the next slide, you'll see a video of how steel is everywhere around us and how far steel has come through the years.
A material that's all around us, everywhere we go, in everything we do. Throughout history, it has been and continues to be our most useful material. From the sleek lines of the modern motor car and the strength and beauty of our acclaimed architecture to the simple durability of a nail, steel dominates our modern lives. The story of how steel is made takes us on a journey from the rich vastness of our western mountains to the remarkable technology of our eastern shores.
Technology in the steel mill industry really helped the small business start out because it was expensive to start. They only started out making small things like knives, swords, and armor because how much steel costs to make all the goods that people needed for their daily lives. There was a large amount of iron ore deposits around Lake Superior. Pennsylvania's coal was easily accessible also, and it was close to cheap water transportation routes through the Great Lakes. This helped the Midwest become the center of America's heavy industry in steel. During the technology revolution, technology was the driving force that helped America grow. The steel supply helped with the rapid expansions of U.S. cities and the expansion of urban infrastructure around America. The 1880s was the turning point for America's steel industry. American steel increased from 1.25 million tons to 10 million tons within this time. By 1910, America was making more than 24 million tons of steel. In 1969, American steel peaked when the country made 141,262,000 tons of steel. That caused large steel mills to be replaced by smaller mini mills. The mini mills were given specific jobs to make specific items for each industry.
The job of a regular steel industry worker is to melt, mold, and form iron ore to make the steel used in our many products that we use today. The workers operate things like furnaces, molding equipment, and rolling and finishing machines. Steel mill workers operated machines to make iron pipes, and to this day, iron pipes, bars, wires, and as you can see, the iron pipe that is in the picture below.
Working conditions in the earlier times were not as easy as they are now. Steel mill workers worked 12 hours a day and 6 days a week, which led to them being less alert and more injuries occurring. After the 1930s, shorter workdays and safer training and equipment was introduced. Labor unions played a lot in making the changes. They bargained for higher wages, for shorter hours, safer workplaces, paid healthcare, and disability insurance. Steel mill workers at the Carnegie Steel Mill, they had it really bad as far as work conditions in 1892. They were working in terrible environments. They worked 12 hours and 7 days a week, and the pay range was only between $1.40 and $10 an hour. That caused a very bad uproar called the Homestead Strike. The strike ended July 6th when the co-owner of the steel mill company ordered open fire, and many of the factory workers were killed. Not only were they overworked, the conditions were very dangerous, and working there was very dangerous. Molten lava will cause harsh and painful burns. The machines could possibly crush on you. Moms were able to cave in or fill in with poisonous or explosive gases. and coal dust could hang in your lungs of the workers and cause lifelong disease, as the picture below shows the lung of a regular person that doesn't work at a steel mill opposed to one that does work at a steel mill. Working in a steel mill is not what I would call an ideal job. All the days are very hot and hard. You work 10 plus hours a day, and you're usually stuck in a dark, dirty building. Working in a steel mill is not easy. You have to really be built for that. The working conditions of a steel mill worker is nothing like the ones in the 1800s. Although it is still very dangerous, modern equipment and facilities have changed this. They have started using items like hard hats, safety shoes, protective glasses, earplugs, and protective clothing to make the job a lot easier and safer. Many tasks are now performed by machines that are controlled by workers sitting in an air-conditioned pulpit supervising the production, so they don't really have to get close to anything.
In 1901, U.S. Steel was formed and later moved on to becoming the biggest steel industry company in the United States. It provided jobs for all kinds of workers, and the economy in the steel industry further increased due to World War II and the need for weapons, and jobs in steel mills kept increasing until after the war. Fortunately, in 1959, there was a major strike in the steel industry, with union workers demanding higher wages due to the price of steel increasing. It was resolved in the early 60s, around 1963, by John F. Kennedy at the time, claiming that wage demands would be stopped and the price of steel wouldn't increase, not affecting the workers. At this point in time, when steel mill jobs were secure, high wages were obtained by unions, and this provided working class members of society middle class living standards. And by the 1970s, unfortunately, steel mill jobs were insecure again due to other countries providing steel at lower prices. Tariffs were applied to steel to combat lower prices from foreign producers. 300,000 jobs were shed over the past quarter century due to being unable to maintain the high wages wanted by employees who were based in unions. Most of the union employees were either laid off or fired due to this, and steel mills were seeking out non-union employees. And due to not wanting to be fired, they increased labor productivity majorly. The economy slowly got better, however, and as of 2014, there are 12 steel mills that are operational across the country, and countless other mini mills or specialty mills that work for specific small companies. The USA still produces millions of tons of steel per year, despite competition from foreign powers that are still producing steel today. More recently, as of 2017, the steel industry in America has held 1.98 million jobs, cost $131 billion in wages and employee benefits, and is output $523 billion into the economy.
The United States benefited from steel immensely. Back in the 1850s, iron rails could not support the speed, weight, and quantity of railway traffic. The solution was to replace these iron rails with steel rails. These steel rails were much more stronger and durable and could handle the increasingly heavy and faster engines in cars. One major advantage that steel had on the United States was how it led to modernization. America was able to modernize their management methods, technology, and mass production. In the 1880s, although highly skilled workers remained essential, the average level of skill declined, meaning that steel workers earned much more than iron workers even though they had fewer skills. American steel production grew from 380,000 tons to 60 million tons annually from 1875 to 1920. This allowed America to expand on urban infrastructures, office buildings, factories, railroads, and bridges. Later down the road, in the 20th century, steel was also used in cars and household appliances. In today's world, steel has created many advantages. These include making the speed of construction a lot quicker, lowering project costs, including being 5 to 7% less than concrete framing systems, and having an overall better aesthetic appeal on structures. This includes looking much better than the iron that was used back in the day. Steel also has the advantages of having high strength for bigger projects and for projects that need it. being sustainable with 88% recycled product, and being innovative, meaning that steel has introduced new methods like long-span deck systems and fire protection. Although steel isn't fireproof, coating systems allow it to be. Steel is modifiable. This is a big advantage because steel can be modified in the future for new applications, loading conditions, vertical expansions, and changes in owner desires. It is also very efficient with 75% less floor space than concrete and overall more reliable and predictable than other materials.
Between the 1840s and the 1860s, Chicago grew from a small town to a larger city, creating the Chicago Rolling Mill Company, who hired around 200 men. Bigger towns, such as Vandergrift or Concrete City, were rare cities. Seeking a place for permanent residency, America was transformed by a wave of newcomers, being the Europeans and African Americans. Steel mills were mostly populated by workers from Germany, England, Ireland, or Wales. Diversity and dynamism changed inside the Steel City and Commonwealth mill towns. Changed occasionally as more immigrants came across the seas. They experienced growth from Andrew Carnegie and Henry Frick. In places like Vandergrift and Johnstown, they were considered lily white, where people thought white Americans had more skill than the African American community, while in Homestead, they had a higher presence, and down south, they made their own unions, being shunned by the white unions. Normally clustered in 4 blocks, Italians took 5th and 6th Avenues, Smithfield, and Grand Streets, while the Polish took the district Southside and Polish Hill. African Americans typically clustered in the Hill District and Homewood Brushton. Flourishing from the mid-1930s to the mid-1970s, strong steel unionism was achieved during the Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Many blue-collar workers achieved a middle-class lifestyle, but the only way you were able to find a job was through someone else.
Some of the key challenges faced by steel manufacturers include solid waste management, the problem of excess capacity, growth in demand, and price volatility of raw materials. Steel is an alloy of iron, which makes it susceptible to corrosion. This problem can be solved to some extent using anti-corrosion applications. It has high maintenance costs as it has to be painted to make it corrosion resistant. There are extensive fireproofing costs involved because steel is not fireproof. In high temperatures, steel loses its properties. Buckling is an issue with steel structures. As the length of the steel column increases, the chances of buckling also increases. Steel also has a high expansion rate with changing temperatures. This can be very detrimental to the overall structure. The financial crisis affected the industry with weak demand negatively impacting prices for finished steels, hurting in particular those companies that sold largely on spot contracts. Challenges are arising from global climate change and the need to limit carbon dioxide emissions from the steel industry. Throughout the 1960s and up to the oil crisis in mid-70s, the steel industry was characterized by a high degree of technological efficiency. In the United States, there are less than 300 employees to produce 1.2 million tons of hot-rolled coils. Lack of modern technological capital inputs and weak facilities leads to a process of steelmaking, which is more time-consuming and expensive. The potential utilization in iron and steel is very low. Rarely the potential utilization exceeds 80%. There is an extreme shortage of metallurgical coal. They also require a large capital investment, but some cannot afford it. For an example, India cannot afford it.
One of the biggest manufacturing challenges faced by the industry today is the lack of skilled workers.
In 1875, Britain accounted for 47% of the world's production of pig iron, a third of which came from the Middlesbrough area, and almost 40% of steel. The Bessemer process was the first inexpensive industrial process for the mass production of steel from molten pig iron before the development of open hearth furnace. The key principle is removal of impurities from the iron by oxidation, with air being blown through the molten iron. "40% of British steel output was exported to the US, which was rapidly building its rail and industrial infrastructure. 2 decades later, in 1896, however, the British share of the world production had plunged to 29% for pig iron and 22.5% for steel. While the French industry was falling behind, the Ruhr Valley provided an excellent location for the German iron and steel industry because of the availability of raw material, coal, transport, and skilled labor force, nearby markets, and an entrepreneurial spirit that led to the creation of many firms. In Italy, the problem was with the shortage of coal that led the industry to specialize in the use of hydroelectrical energy, exploiting ideas pioneered by Ernesto Stanzano from 1898. Britain led the world industrial revolution with its early commitment to coal mining, steam power, textile mills, machinery, railways, and shipbuilding. British demand for iron and steel, combined with ample capital and energetic entrepreneurs, made it the world leader in the first half of the 19th century.
Steel technology has changed majorly, improving the nation greatly. Even though the working conditions were poor, they have improved over time with the help of unions and strikes. Coming from advantages of steel rails and the modernization of speeding up construction and lower costs, bringing many families across the seas to grow mill towns to what they have today, overcoming each obstacle with solutions, and finally implementing the use of overseas manufacturing for the future global economy.
All of the sources above were used to help us figure out how the steel industry has evolved and what they've done over the years to make the industry change. Some of the resources helped figure out with technology, and others helped figure out with other advances that were made during this time.